On a quiet Sunday morning, November 29th, 2009, four police officers sat inside a small coffee shop in Parkland, Washington. They were starting their shift, sipping coffee, catching up on weekend plans, unaware that within seconds their lives would end. At 8:15 a.m., a man walked through the door. He didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He pulled out a Glock 17 and opened fire. Sergeant Mark Renninger, Officer Ronald Owens, Officer Tina Griswold, and Officer Greg Richards, all veterans of the Lakewood Police Department, were shot and killed before they could even reach for their weapons. It was the deadliest attack on law enforcement in Washington's history. The shooter was Maurice Clemmons, a 37-year-old felon from Arkansas with a violent past and a history of mental instability. He claimed he was being persecuted by the justice system and that he'd been chosen by God to cleanse the police. What made the massacre even more shocking was how preventable it might have been. Clemmons had been released from jail just days earlier after posting a $150,000 bond despite multiple felony charges, including child assault and armed robbery. For the next 2 days, a massive manhunt swept across the Seattle area. Hundreds of officers searched for Clemmons. He bragged that he wouldn't be taken alive. On December 1st, his prophecy came true. He was gunned down by a lone Seattle police officer, ending one of the most terrifying manhunts in state history. This is not just the story of a massacre. It's the story of Maurice Clemmons, a man consumed by rage delusion and the belief that justice itself was his enemy. Classification: mass murderer. Characteristics: it is believed to be the most deadly attack on law enforcement in the state of Washington. Number of victims: 4. Date of murders: November 29th, 2009. Date of birth: February the 6th, 1972. Victim's profile: Sergeant Mark Renninger, 39. Officer Ronald Owens, 37. Officer Tina Griswold, 40. Officer Greg Richards, 42. Method of murder: shooting, Glock 17, 9mm, semi-automatic handgun. Location: Pierce County, Washington, USA. Status: shot and killed by a Seattle Police Department officer 2 days after Maurice Clemmons. February 6, 1972, December 1st, 2009, was an American felon who was responsible for the November 29, 2009 murder of 4 police officers in Parkland, Washington. After evading police for 2 days following the shooting, Clemmons was shot and killed by a police officer in Seattle. Prior to his involvement in the shooting, Clemmons had at least 5 felony convictions in Arkansas and at least 8 felony charges in Washington. His first incarceration began in 1989 at age 17. Facing sentences totaling 108 years in prison, the burglary sentences were reduced in 2000 by Governor of Arkansas Mike Huckabee to 47 years, which made him immediately eligible for parole. The Arkansas Parole Board unanimously moved to release him in 2000. Clemmons was subsequently arrested on other charges and was jailed several times. In the months prior to the Parkland shooting, he was in jail on charges of assaulting a police officer and raping a child. 1 week prior to the Parkland shooting, he was released from jail after posting a $150,000 bail bond. Clemmons' murder of 4 police officers represents the largest number of law enforcement officers killed by one man in a single incident in U.S. history. Early life and crimes. Maurice Clemmons' father made frames for automobile seats at a Chrysler factory, and his mother, Dorothy Mae Clemmons, worked in a nursing home. He had 5 siblings. Clemmons lived in Marianna, Arkansas in his early youth and moved to Little Rock as a teen. He was arrested when he was a junior at Hall High School for carrying a .25 caliber pistol on school property. He claimed to be carrying the gun because he was beaten by dopers and said he had something for them if they attacked him again. Clemmons did not return to school and finished his education at 11th grade. In 1989, a 17-year-old Clemmons and two other accomplices robbed a woman at midnight in the parking lot of a Little Rock hotel bar. Clemmons pretended to have a gun in his pocket and threatened to shoot her if she did not give him her purse. When she responded, "Well, why don't you just shoot?" he punched her in the head and ran off with the purse, which contained $16 and a credit card. Clemmons was accused multiple times of displaying violent behavior during court appearances. In one incident, he dismantled a metal doorstop and hid it in his sock to use as a weapon. It was discovered and confiscated by a court bailiff. In another incident, he took a lock from his holding cell and threw it at a bailiff, but missed and accidentally hit his mother instead. Clemmons was once accused of reaching for a guard's pistol while being transported to court. During one trial, he was shackled in leg irons and seated next to a uniformed officer because the presiding judge ordered extra security, claiming Clemmons had threatened him. At age 16, Clemmons's charges were committed from juvenile court to adult court due to the extremely violent nature of his crimes and demeanor. By 1990, Clemmons was sentenced to 108 years in prison for 8 felony charges from his teenage years in Arkansas. The total prison term stemmed from multiple sentences, some of which were concurrent to others and some were consecutive. The largest sentencing came in 1990 when he was given a 60-year prison term for breaking into an Arkansas state trooper's home and stealing about £6,700 worth of items, including a gun. During his sentencing on the charges, a circuit judge told Clemmons that he had broken his mother's heart, to which he responded, "I have broken my own heart." Clemmons was also sentenced in 1989 to 35 years in prison for robbing the woman in front of the Little Rock hotel bar. Among his other sentences were 6 years for weapon possession based on his high school arrest, and 8 years for burglary, theft and probation in Pulaski County on September 9, 1989. He was not to be eligible for parole until 2015 or later. He was originally held at the Tucker Correctional Facility in Tucker, Arkansas, but was eventually transferred to the Cummins Unit near Grady. Clemency. In 1999, after having served 10 years of his sentence, Clemmons filed a clemency appeal with Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. In his petition to Huckabee, Clemmons wrote, "He came from a very good Christian family and was raised much better than my actions speak." Clemmons claimed he had just moved from Seattle, Washington to Arkansas as a teenager, and because he had no friends, he gave in to peer pressure and fell in with the wrong crowd to be accepted by his young peers, which led him to commit his crimes. Although he apologized for his actions, Clemmons also complained that he received overly harsh sentences. He also claimed to have changed and expressed regret that his mother had recently died without seeing him turn his life around. Clemmons's clemency application was supported by Pulaski County Circuit Court Judge Marion Humphrey, who argued the cumulative sentence was excessive and cited Clemmons' young age at the time he committed the crimes. The decision was made over the objections of some victims and prosecutors involved in Clemmons' previous cases, but was supported by the bipartisan parole board and the trial court judge in Clemmons' case. Mark Fraser, an attorney who prosecuted early cases against Clemmons in Pulaski County, argued Clemmons was extremely likely to commit further acts of violence in the future and said for a teen to receive such a lengthy prison sentence without committing a murder, "You've got to be a bad little dude." On May 3, 2000, Huckabee commuted Clemmons' 108-year sentence to 47 years, 5 months and 19 days, which made him eligible for parole that day. As a factor in his decision, Huckabee cited the unusually long sentence for Clemmons' age at the time the crimes were committed. The Arkansas Parole Board unanimously approved Clemmons' release on July 13, 2000, and he was set free on August 1, 2000. Later crimes. In March 2001, Clemmons violated parole by committing aggravated robbery and theft, again in Ouachita County. He was convicted on July 13, 2001, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He also faced charges of parole violations, but due to problems with the case, he was not served with the charges until 2004. His attorney argued the parole violation charges should be dropped because so much time had passed and they were subsequently dismissed. Clemmons was granted parole on the robbery charges in 2004. He told the parole board he was not ready the first time he was released, but that he doesn't want to die in prison and will try to do the right thing. Clemmons moved to Washington in 2004 while still on parole, which was approved by Arkansas authorities. That year, he married a woman named Nicole Smith, although the Seattle Times later reported the relationship had been tumultuous. Clemmons was placed under the supervision of the Washington State Department of Corrections and classified as high risk to reoffend. His supervision was to continue until October 2015. He lived in Tacoma, where he ran a landscaping and power washing business out of his house. Over the next 5 years, Clemmons bought 6 houses, including 1 in Arkansas and 5 in Washington. Following his parole in 2004, Clemmons had no arrests or problems with the law until May 2009. The Seattle Times referred to 4 days in May 2009 as the time when Maurice Clemmons' behavior and mental state deteriorated. On May the 9th, a Pierce County Sheriff's deputy responded to Clemmons' home after reports he was throwing rocks at houses, cars, and people. When the deputy tried to enter the house, one of Clemmons' cousins grabbed his wrist. After a struggle, Clemmons emerged from the house and punched the deputy in the face and assaulted a second deputy who arrived to help. Clemmons was placed under arrest and taken to Pierce County Jail, where he continued to struggle and told jail workers, "I'll kill all you bitches." He was charged with 2 felony assault charges and 2 felony malicious mischief charges and released from jail the next day after posting a $40,000 bail bond without seeing a judge. On May 11th, around 1 a.m., Clemmons appeared naked in his living room and ordered 2 female relatives, ages 11 and 12, to fondle him. The 2 reportedly complied out of fear, and the 11-year-old fled the house afterward. Clemmons took the 12-year-old into his bedroom along with Clemmons' wife. Clemmons repeatedly referred to himself as Jesus and said his wife was Eve. He released the 12-year-old girl after his wife begged him to let her go. However, at about 4 a.m. that same morning, Clemmons gathered his family back into the living room and demanded they strip naked together. He later left the house, claiming the world was coming to an end and that he was going to fly to heaven. A family member called 911 and police found Clemmons at a nearby second house he was building, but Clemmons fled on foot and escaped. He failed to appear the next day for an arraignment on his May 9th charges. Child Protective Services investigated and substantiated the sexual abuse complaint. Latanya Clemmons' sister told authorities he had undergone a change and was not in his right mind. Clemmons was arrested on July 1, 2009, after he appeared in a Pierce County court trying to have his bench warrant thrown out. He was charged with second-degree rape of a child as well as being a fugitive from Arkansas. At the time of his arrest, Clemmons made religiously themed comments and referred to himself as the Beast. He also told a police officer that President Barack Obama and LeBron James were his brothers, and Oprah Winfrey was his sister. Pierce County prosecutors claimed Clemmons' recent crimes amounted to a violation of Clemmons' parole in Arkansas, and that he faced years in prison if he was returned to the state. However, the Arkansas Department of Community Correction notified Pierce County on July 27th that they did not intend to ask for his extradition and that he should be adjudicated on his Washington charges. Stephen Penner, a deputy prosecuting attorney in Pierce County, said of the Arkansas decision, "There's a built-in incentive to not following through. In a way, the more violent they are, the less you want them in your community." During a court-ordered mental health evaluation, Clemmons told psychologists he had experienced hallucinations in May 2009 of people drinking blood and people eating babies and lawless on the streets like people were cannibals. He claimed the visions had since passed. He also claimed to have no faith in the American justice system and thought he was being maliciously persecuted because I'm black and they believe the police. The evaluation completed by two psychologists from the Western State Hospital on October 19th concluded Clemmons was dangerous and presented an increased risk of future criminal acts. Pierce County Judge John McCarthy set bail for Clemmons' assault charges at $40,000, below the $100,000 that prosecutors sought based on Clemmons' history of violence. Pierce County Judge Thomas Fellnagel set bail for the child rape charges at $150,000, lower than the $200,000 sought by prosecutors, but higher than usual for the charges. After a mental evaluation, a psychologist concluded Clemmons was competent to stand trial on the charges, which eliminated him as a candidate for involuntary commitment. An attorney for Clemmons notified the court he planned to pursue an insanity or diminished capacity defense. On November 23, 2009, Clemmons paid $15,000 for a $190,000 bail bond from Jail Sucks Bail Bonds, a Chehalis-based company, to secure his release. Two other bail bond agencies had rejected Clemmons based on his history of failing to appear in court. 2009 police officer shooting. Clemmons failed to check in with his community corrections officer within 24 hours of his release as required, but nothing was done in response. On November 26, 2009, less than 1 week after Clemmons posted his bail bond during a Thanksgiving gathering at the home of Clemmons' aunt, Clemmons told several people he was angry about his Pierce County legal problems and that he planned to use a gun to murder police officers and others, including school children. He showed a gun to the people in the room and told them he had 2 others in his car and home. Clemmons said he planned to activate an alarm by removing a court-ordered ankle monitor, then he would shoot the police officers who responded to his house. In describing the planned murder, Clemmons said, "Knock, knock, knock, boom." Darkus Allen, a convicted murderer who previously served in the Arkansas prison with Clemmons, was allegedly present for the conversation. Also on Thanksgiving, Clemmons cut off a GPS monitor Jail Sucks Bail Bonds had secured onto his ankle. On November 28th, Clemmons showed 2 handguns to friends Eddie and Douglas Davis and told them he planned to shoot police officers with them. The exchange was witnessed by Clemmons' half-brother Ricky Hinton, with whom he shared a house. During the exchange, Clemmons danced around with the guns in his hands, claiming to be Lucifer. He told the men he had twice tried to go to a Tacoma police station where he planned to walk in and start shooting. The first time the station was closed, and the second time he got a flat tire on the way there, Clemmons claimed. He also talked about stopping at a crowded intersection or a school and shooting people there. On the morning of November 29th, Clemmons drove a white pickup truck to Allen's home. Then Allen drove him past the Forza Coffee shop in Lakewood, a suburb of Tacoma. After they saw marked police patrol cars in the parking lot, Allen drove back past the coffee shop and parked nearby. Some reports from witnesses said Clemmons parked his truck in a car wash north of the coffee shop and pretended to clean the vehicle but never turned the hose on. Around 8 a.m., Clemmons walked into the Forza Coffee shop where 4 police officers were working on laptops before their shift. Clemmons opened fire on the officers, shooting them to death. Investigators said the murders were a targeted execution-style attack and not associated with a robbery.
Clemmons did not aim at any other customers or the two baristas working at the time. The four slain officers were Mark Renninger, 39, killed with a shot to the head; Ronald Owens, 37, shot in the neck; Tina Griswold, 40, shot in the head; and Greg Richards, 42, shot in the head.
As Clemmons fled, Officer Richards struggled with him in the restaurant's doorway, then shot Clemmons in the back before the officer succumbed to a bullet wound to his head. The shooter stole Richards' Glock pistols before escaping. Clemmons returned to the truck and Allen drove him away. Allen later told detectives he stopped at an intersection and abandoned Clemmons and the truck, claiming he "wants of no part of this." Authorities, however, later disputed this claim and said there was no evidence Allen abandoned the vehicle. Clemmons was identified later that day as a person of interest in the murders, but soon after was identified as a wanted suspect. Police identified no motive for the murders, and Detective Ed Troyer, Pierce County Sheriff's Office spokesman, said, "We're going to be surprised if there is a motive worth mentioning." Police initially believed the suspect may have died from his injuries shortly after the shooting. Clemmons went back to his house and told Hinton he had been shot by police, and Hinton allegedly gave Eddie and Douglas Davis a car to get Clemmons out of here. As they drove, Clemmons told the brothers he had taken care of his business. The Davis brothers took Clemmons to other friends who bandaged his wounds. Later that day, police received a tip that Clemmons was seeking shelter from friends in Seattle. Police pulled over a white car they believed to have been transporting him, and the female driver admitted Clemmons was a friend, and she had brought him to Seattle after he told her he had killed a police officer or officers. Coffee shop employees who witnessed the shooting identified Clemmons as the shooter from a series of photos. Authorities sought him in what was considered one of the biggest manhunts the Seattle-Tacoma area had ever seen, and Clemmons was considered the most wanted man in the Pacific Northwest. Authorities also surrounded the homes of Clemmons's friends and family in order to prevent him from finding shelter and to determine who was helping him. A Clemmons relative learned that Clemmons was coming to her home in the Leshy, Seattle neighborhood, informed the police, and fled. Police locked down the house for 11 hours in the early morning of November 30th, believing Clemmons to be holed up inside. After several attempts to coax or force him out of the house, including use of a robot and flashbang grenades, police entered and discovered Clemmons was not inside. Later in the day, police searched multiple locations in the Seattle and Tacoma areas, including a park where they found a handgun carried by Clemmons and his pickup truck, which had bloodstains inside. Death. On December 1st, 2009, Clemmons was shot and killed by Seattle police officer Benjamin L. Kelly. Around 2:45 a.m., Kelly was on patrol and stopped to investigate a broken-down car on the side of the road, which was idling with its hood up. Kelly recognized the vehicle as having been reported stolen. While sitting in his patrol car and writing a report, Kelly noticed Clemmons approaching him and recognized him as the suspect in the Lakewood shooting. Kelly ordered him to stop and show his hands, but he instead began to flee around the disabled vehicle. Police claim that Clemmons reached into his waist area for a gun. Kelly fired several rounds at Clemmons and hit him at least twice, killing him. Clemmons was carrying a handgun that had belonged to Lakewood officer Greg Richards. Kelly was placed on routine administrative leave following the shooting. Police later said Clemmons would have eventually died from the gunshot wound he sustained at the Lakewood shooting. Since his death, multiple people have been arrested for helping Clemmons during and after the Lakewood shooting. Authorities claim the accomplices misled police about his whereabouts, gave him cell phones and money, applied first aid to his gunshot wounds, and tried to help him leave the state. Among those arrested were Clemmons' sister, who bandaged his wounds and provided him transportation. Authorities arrested 5 other people for assisting Clemmons: Latricia Nelson, Quiana Williams, Douglas Davis, Eddie Davis, and Ricky Hinton. Darcus Allen was arrested and charged with aggravated first-degree murder for his alleged role as Clemmons' getaway driver.
Allen claims he did not know Clemmons's plans when he drove him to the coffee shop, but authorities argued he had known for days that Clemmons planned to murder police officers. A cell phone photograph taken of Clemmons's shirtless dead body quickly spread among city residents and government employees, prompting questions over who took it and how it became circulated. If the photo was leaked by an employee of the city or emergency responder, the action may possibly violate their employment contract. Funeral arrangements were kept private by the family due to the circumstances of his crime. The Lakewood police officer shooting took place on Sunday, November 29, 2009, when 4 Lakewood, Washington police officers were murdered at a coffee shop in the Parkland unincorporated area of Pierce County, Washington. One gunman, later identified as Maurice Clemmons, entered the coffee shop, fired at the officers as they sat working on their laptop computers preparing for their shifts, and then fled the scene. After a 2-day manhunt that spanned several cities in the Puget Sound region, the gunman was shot and killed by a Seattle Police Department officer in South Seattle after refusing orders to stop. The shooting is believed to have been a targeted attack against police officers and came less than a month after a Seattle police officer was murdered and his trainee injured under similar circumstances nearly 40 miles, 64 kilometers to the north. Another shooting, involving Pierce County Sheriff's deputies, occurred 3 weeks after in Eatonville on December the 21st, when 2 deputies were shot and critically injured. One later died from his injuries by a man who was then shot dead. It is believed to be the most deadly attack on law enforcement in the state of Washington, and the deadliest attack on law enforcement in the United States since the March 21, 2009 shootings that left 4 Oakland, California police officers dead. The 4 were the first Lakewood police officers to be killed in the line of duty since the department's establishment in 2004. Although the gunman was killed by police, 6 other people were charged in connection with the murders. All 6 are friends and family of Clemmons who aided him in escaping the scene and eluding capture. One was convicted in June 2010 and was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. In December 2010, 3 of 4 accused suspects were found guilty of rendering criminal assistance. In May 2011, Darcus Allen, the getaway driver and remaining suspect, was convicted of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to 420 years in prison the following month. Immediately following the shootings, the Lakewood Police Independent Guild set up a memorial fund for the officers. As of 2012, about $3.2 million were donated to the fund. In March 2012, Lakewood police officer Skeeter Timothy Manos pled guilty to using the account set up for donations as his own personal piggy bank. Victims. All 4 officers had been with the Lakewood Police Department since its establishment. They were Sergeant Mark Renninger, 39. 13 years of law enforcement experience, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Officer Ronald Owens, 12 years of law enforcement experience of Puyallup, died from a gunshot wound to the neck. Officer Tina Griswold, 14 years of law enforcement experience, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Officer Greg Richards, 42. 8 years of law enforcement experience of Graham, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Suspect. The gunman was identified as 37-year-old Maurice Clemmons, originally from Marianna, Arkansas. Clemmons had a violent criminal history with at least 5 felony convictions in Arkansas and 8 felony charges in Washington. In 2000, Clemmons had his 95-year sentence for aggravated robbery commuted by then-Governor Mike Huckabee and moved to Western Washington in 2004. In spring 2009, Clemmons was charged with rape of a child and third-degree assault on a police officer for punching a Pierce County Sheriff's deputy in the face during a confrontation, and was let out of jail on those charges after posting a $150,000 bail bond 1 week prior to the shootings. Incident. Preceding the shooting. Clemmons' last arrest before the shooting was on July 1, 2009, for failure to appear in court.
On November 23, 2009, Clemmons paid $15,000 for a $190,000 bail bond from Jail Sucks Bail Bonds, a Chehalis-based company, to secure his release. 2 other bail bond agencies had rejected Clemmons based on his history of failing to appear in court. Clemmons failed to check in with his community corrections officer within 24 hours of his release as required, but nothing was done in response. On November 26, 2009, less than 1 week after Clemmons posted his bail bond during a Thanksgiving gathering at the home of Clemmons's aunt, Clemmons told several people he was angry about his Pierce County legal problems and that he planned to use a gun to murder police officers and others, including school children. He showed a gun to the people in the room and told them he had 2 others in his car and home. Clemmons said he planned to activate an alarm by removing a court-ordered ankle monitor. Then he would shoot the police officers who responded to his house. In describing the planned murder, Clemmons said, "Knock, knock, knock, boom." Darkus Allen, a convicted murderer who previously served in an Arkansas prison with Clemmons, was allegedly present for the conversation. Also on Thanksgiving, Clemmons cut off a GPS monitor Jail Sucks Bail Bonds had secured onto his ankle. On November 28th, Clemmons showed 2 handguns to friends Eddie and Douglas Davis and told them he planned to shoot police officers with them. The exchange was witnessed by Clemmons' half-brother Ricky Hinton, with whom he shared a house. During the exchange, Clemmons danced around with the guns in his hands, claiming to be Lucifer. He told the men he had twice tried to go to a Tacoma police station where he planned to walk in and start shooting. The first time the station was closed, and the second time he got a flat tire on the way there, Clemmons claimed. He also talked about stopping at a crowded intersection or a school and shooting people there. Shooting. On the morning of Sunday, November the 29th, 2009, the 4 officers were working on their laptop computers prior to the start of their shift inside a Forza Coffee Company coffee shop in nearby Parkland, adjacent to McCord Air Force Base. All 4 were in full uniform, armed and wearing bulletproof vests. Clemmons drove a white pickup truck to Allen's home, then Allen drove him past the coffee shop. After they saw marked police patrol cars in the parking lot, Allen drove back past the coffee shop and parked nearby. Some reports from witnesses said Clemmons parked his truck in a car wash stall at the coffee shop and pretended to clean the vehicle, but never turned the hose on. At approximately 8:15 a.m., UTC 8, Clemmons entered the coffee shop, approached the counter, turned around and opened fire on the 4 seated officers with a Glock 17 9mm semi-automatic handgun. He also carried a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. Sergeant Mark Reniger and Officer Tina Griswold were killed as they sat in their chairs, both shot in the head. Officer Ronald Owens was shot in the neck as he stood up and attempted to draw his weapon. Officer Greg Richards managed to fight back against Clemmons and fired his own weapon, hitting Clemmons in the abdomen before succumbing to a shot to the head. Clemmons then stole Richards's Glocks before fleeing the scene. Clemmons was then seen getting into a vehicle which fled the scene. Neither of the 2 coffee shop employees nor the other customers in the store were hurt, and no money was taken from the cash register. Investigators say the murder was a targeted attack against police officers in general, since none of the 4 officers were individually targeted, and robbery was ruled out as a motive. Clemmons returned to the truck and Allen drove him away. Allen later told detectives he stopped at an intersection and abandoned Clemmons and the truck, claiming he wanted of no part of this. However, the police later disputed this claim and said there was no evidence Allen abandoned the vehicle. Manhunt. The afternoon following the shooting, the Pierce County Sheriff identified Maurice Clemmons, who had long criminal history in Arkansas and Washington, as the suspected murderer. Police confirmed that Clemmons had been shot in the abdomen during the attack and advised hospitals to keep an eye out for walk-ins with gunshot wounds. In the late evening hours of November 29th, Seattle police believed they had Clemmons surrounded in a home in the Leshy area of Seattle. along with air support provided by King County Sheriff's Office SWAT teams from the King County Sheriff's Office, Seattle Police Department, Tacoma Police Department, and other agencies, entered the home after a 12-hour standoff, but found no one inside. Earlier in the day, Tacoma police served a search warrant on a Tacoma home belonging to a person of interest and collected evidence. An intense manhunt ensued, and police from agencies in Pierce and King counties conducted searches at the University of Washington campus Rizal Park and in Renton, none of which turned up the suspect. King County Sheriff's deputies and Washington State Patrol troopers acting on a tip were also conducting surveillance and going door-to-door at Snoqualmie Pass area homes 50 miles 80 km east of Seattle. A tip stated that Clemmons was going to be dropped off at Snoqualmie Pass to be handed off to another person to escape the region. After hours of investigating, the search was called off. The tip had been one of thousands of tips that came into local law enforcement agencies. Suspects in his escape later admitted that false tips were called in to sidetrack law enforcement officials. Death of Clemmons. Around 2:45 a.m. on December the 1st, a Seattle police officer on patrol in South Seattle came upon a 1990 Acura Integra parked on the street at 44th Place South and South Kenyon Street, unoccupied, with its hood raised and the engine running. He ran the vehicle's license plate number and determined that it had been stolen about 2 hours earlier. While sitting in his patrol car filling out paperwork in conjunction with the stolen vehicle, the officer noticed a person matching Clemmons' description approaching him from behind, first walking on the sidewalk and then in the middle of the street. Police accounts state that the officer confronted the suspect and ordered him to stop and show his hands, but the suspect instead began to flee around the disabled vehicle and reportedly reached into his waist area and moved as the officer was drawing his sidearm. The officer fired 3 shots at the suspect, followed by another 4 shots as he ran away in a dead sprint, striking him at least twice. The suspect managed to reach the sidewalk and collapsed face down in a walkway leading to a home on Kenyon Street. The officer then retreated behind his patrol car, retrieved his shotgun, and called for backup. Within seconds, Seattle police swarmed the scene, and a team of officers approached the suspect, handcuffed him, and dragged him away from the home. Seattle Fire Department medics responded and pronounced the suspect dead at the scene. Seattle police later identified the deceased suspect as Clemmons. Clemmons was allegedly carrying a handgun that was identified by tracing the serial number as having belonged to Greg Richards, the officer who had managed to shoot Clemmons before succumbing to his injuries. Clemmons also had a prior gunshot wound that had been stuffed with cotton and gauze and sealed with duct tape that the police determined was sustained in the Parkland shooting. At the time of Clemmons' death, the police were offering a $145,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. Aftermath. Weapons. Federal authorities ran traces on a 9mm Glock Model 17 and a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. The Glock was purchased in June 2005 at a Renton, Washington pawn shop, Ben's Loan Inc. The purchaser reported the gun stolen in March 2006 after his car was broken into at a downtown Seattle parking garage at 2nd Avenue and James Street. The Smith & Wesson revolver was shipped in 1981 to the now closed Police Arms and Citizen Supply in Lakewood, Colorado, but from that point no details were found. Accomplices. As of December 2, 2009, 6 individuals have been arrested and face charges of providing assistance to Clemmons before and after the shooting. One of those 6, who was already wanted in connection with a bank robbery in Arkansas, served time with Clemmons in an Arkansas prison and is believed to have helped Clemmons escape the scene of the shooting. The other 5 are accused of providing assistance to Clemmons, such as transporting him to several locations, providing him with money and cell phones, making arrangements for him to flee the state, and treating his gunshot wound sustained in the Parkland shooting, all with full knowledge of the crime he had committed. In June 2010, Clemmons' sister was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for acting as a getaway driver after the shooting. Later in December, 3 of 4 other suspects were convicted. On January 14, 2011, Pierce County Superior Court Judge Stephanie Arend sentenced accomplices Eddie Lee Davis to 10 years, 5 months, Douglas Edward Davis to 7 years, 6 months, and Latricia Nelson to 6 years, 2 months in state prison. Political. Mike Huckabee has received nationwide criticism for his role in Clemmons' release from prison in 2000. The evening of the shooting, Huckabee released a statement seeking to cast some of the responsibility for Clemmons' release onto the parole board that freed him and the criminal justice system that Huckabee said repeatedly failed to properly handle him. In his statement, Huckabee said, "Should he be found to be responsible for this horrible tragedy, it will be the result of a series of failures in the criminal justice system in both Arkansas and Washington state." Huckabee, who was considered a favorite for the Republican Party presidential nomination in 2012, claimed that the situation was used as a political weapon against him. Clemmons has been compared to Willie Horton, a convicted felon who was furloughed from a Massachusetts prison in 1986, but never returned, and committed more violent crimes several months later. The Horton case eventually factored into the 1988 presidential campaign of Democratic Party candidate Michael Dukakis, who was governor of Massachusetts at the time and supported the furlough program. Timothy Egan, opinion writer for the New York Times, said of Huckabee's role in Clemmons' release, "If this case does not sink the presidential aspirations of Huckabee, it should." The incident has also led some university professors, criminologists, and attorneys to speculate that U.S. governors will become more reluctant to grant pardons and clemencies to convicted felons in order to avoid the negative publicity faced by Dukakis and Huckabee in the Horton and Clemmons cases, respectively. Officers' Memorial Service. A public memorial service for the 4 slain officers was held December 8, 2009, at the Tacoma Dome. The day began with a 10-mile, 16-kilometer procession from McCord Air Force Base past the Lakewood Police Station to the Tacoma Dome. Over 2,000 police and fire vehicles from over 150 different law enforcement and fire agencies participated in the procession, which took 5 hours to complete. Over 20,000 people, mostly from the law enforcement and firefighting communities, attended the service at the Tacoma Dome. Police officers from as far away as New York City and Boston, as well as a large contingent of Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, were in attendance. Lakewood's mayor and police chief gave remarks at the service, followed by eulogies by family, friends, and colleagues of the 4 officers. Washington Governor Christine Gregoire also spoke, saying, "We will remember them today. We will remember them always." The service concluded with a played recording of a police dispatcher attempting to call each officer with no response, and the dispatcher declaring each officer as gone but not forgotten. The officers' remains were buried in private ceremonies by their individual families. From a logistical standpoint, the agencies preparing for the memorial services expected 20,000 law enforcement personnel to appear at the service. 1,000 emergency vehicles and police cruisers were set up to follow the families of the victims to the Tacoma Dome. 50 people from several public agencies worked to make the event occur smoothly. Jody Woodcock, a program manager of the Pierce County Department of Emergency Management, said that the agencies planned to make the event look like it was easily prepared, and that the authorities intend to take care of all the details so the families and the law enforcement community don't have to think about them. Rob Carson of the Seattle Times said, "Logistically, the event is staggering in its complexity." Alaska Airlines gave airline tickets to family members who were going to the event and were flying into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport from other states. The American Red Cross donated food and water for the event. In the end, Maurice Clemmons died the way he lived in violence and chaos. On December 1st, 2009, just 2 days after the Lakewood police massacre, Clemmons was tracked down in Seattle. When confronted by a lone officer, he reached for a stolen gun, the same gun taken from one of the officers he had murdered. He was shot dead instantly. For the families of Sergeant Mark Renninger, Officer Ronald Owens, Officer Tina Griswold, and Officer Greg Richards, there was no closure, only survival. Their names became etched in the hearts of Washington's law enforcement community, a constant reminder of the risks officers take every day and of how one man's madness can tear through an entire city. But beyond the grief came anger at a system that had allowed Clemmons to walk free. Despite his violent record, his history of mental instability and multiple pending charges, the courts had released him on bail. Days later, 4 officers were dead. The tragedy sparked a nationwide debate about bail reform, mental health, and accountability in the justice system. Could this have been prevented? Or was it the inevitable result of a system that too often balances compassion with blindness? In Arkansas, where Clemmons' criminal history began, another controversy unfolded. Years earlier, his sentence had been commuted by then-Governor Mike Huckabee, a decision that would haunt him for years. It was a grim reminder that one act of leniency can ripple into unimaginable consequences. Maurice Clemmons left behind a legacy of destruction, but also a warning. A warning about the cost of ignoring red flags. A warning about the fragile line between rehabilitation and responsibility. The story of Maurice Clemmons isn't just about 4 fallen officers. It's about a system that failed to see the storm coming until it was too late. For the families of the victims, justice came not through the courts, but through survival. The strength to keep living in the shadow of an unspeakable loss. If this story made you question justice, mercy, and the cost of freedom, subscribe for more true crime documentaries that expose the hidden failures behind the world's most haunting crimes.